Iowa State quarterback Rocco Becht announced that he's going to enter the transfer portal. So that means he's going to end up at Penn State, right? Not necessarily.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcasting network out there. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. We're going to talk about the assistant coaches that still haven't been named. Okay, what's going on at defensive line? Linebackers coach Deion Barnes, Dan Connor, they're expected to stay, but they haven't been officially announced as returning. Also, running backs coach. I got a couple of candidates that are definitely worth hiring for Penn State. And D'Anton Lynn emerged as the primary target for Penn State's defensive coordinator spot. USC, Lincoln Riley don't seem too confident about retaining him. So why hasn't that been announced? Why hasn't Penn State officially hired D'Anton Lynn? Is it even going to happen? We'll discuss that in the upcoming segment. We got to begin at quarterback, though, because Rocco Becht, Iowa State QB, is going to enter the transfer portal, he announced. But it's not guaranteed that he's going to end up at Penn State. That might come as a surprise. Penn State fans would naturally expect, hey, your head coach is now at Penn State. Your offensive coordinator is now at Penn State. Your quarterback's coach are all in Happy Valley. So surely Rocco Becht is going to follow them to Penn State. It's not guaranteed. Not necessarily the case. Why? Because Penn State's going to have ample competition here. They're not going to be the only school that's going to pursue Rocco Becht. Are they going to be one of the leading schools? Were they one of the first schools that were naturally connected to Becht when he put his name out there? Because the portal hasn't officially opened, but he announced his intentions, right? Yes, Penn State is going to be one of those leading schools. They are certainly going to be in the mix. We know that as a guarantee. What's not a guarantee is that he actually ends up in Happy Valley. Rocco Becht is a top 5 quarterback so far in this transfer portal right now. There is going to be stiff competition to try to land one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer portal. And I know what people are going to say, that Rocco Becht's not actually that good. Well, tell that to On3 24/7, because 24/7 has him rated as the 4th best quarterback right now. Okay? The only people that he is behind at this given moment, Sam Leavitt of Arizona State, that's understandable. Dylan Raiola being a former 5-star quarterback from Nebraska, and DJ Lagway, former 5-star. Rocco Becht is not too far behind them, and he's the 4th overall quarterback as it stands. There are going to be a number of teams that are going to be looking for someone that has played a ton of college football, is basically a plug and play in a lot of different offenses. He's a traditional pocket passer. He can move if necessary, right? If you haven't seen a lot of Rocco Becht play at Iowa State. He is a good passer. I think he's dealt with, not having the best supporting cast at times. This team was pretty banged up at times this season. But when Taylor Mauser had guys like Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel for him to throw to, who were 2 pro caliber receivers the season before, Iowa State was at the top of the Big 12 conference. Rocco Becht had his best season when he had NFL caliber wide receivers to throw to. Those guys leave. They don't replace the production. They don't replace the talent. And Becht doesn't look as good. And he also had 2 injuries to each shoulder this past season. I'm going to give Becht the benefit of the doubt. I would want him as Penn State's starting quarterback next season on the idea that Ethan Grunkemeyer is not going to be around. So what does Penn State do, right? Does Penn State, do they hope that they get Rocco Becht? Do they go with Ethan Grunkemeyer? Is there somebody else they could go with? Because a familiar friend, familiar face, put his name into the transfer portal again. Penn State really doesn't have a bad option here, and it's a good thing that they have options. You can go with Rocco Becht, but I've also talked about how Penn State needs to figure out its quarterback depth chart as well. If they're going to bring in Rocco Becht, I wouldn't expect Ethan Grunkemeyer to stay at Penn State. He's been a starter. In theory, you could try to convince him to go back and be quarterback number 2 again. That would give Penn State one of the best QB depth charts in the entire country. To have Rocco Becht, to have Ethan Grunkemeyer in the same room, but is Grunk going to do that? Probably not, especially when your head coach, someone that you're familiar with, he's not your OC, he's not your offensive coordinator, but you know Ty Howell. You also know your quarterbacks, Coach Danny O'Brien. If Ethan Grunkemeyer is not going to be at Penn State, it's going to be at Virginia Tech. But no, when it comes to Rocco Becht, it's not a guarantee that Penn State's going to land him just because everybody's at Happy Valley. I give them a strong chance. I would still expect them to land Rocco Becht. But if you find a program, let's take Oregon, for example. Dante Moore might not be back. But if they don't get Sam Leavitt, if they don't get, maybe they don't want DJ Lagway. Maybe they don't think that he fits their offense. Rocco Becht, if Penn State's not willing to compete for a hefty NIL compensation package, he could go to a place that is desperate to say, we can still win now. We need a quarterback that helps us now on a 1-year plan, and you can roll with him. I'm just saying, it's a possibility. So Rocco Becht, you have Ethan Grunkemeyer, who I've said should be Penn State starter, would be Penn State starter for the foreseeable future if you went with him. He's got 3 years of eligibility left, and I would take Ethan Grunkemeyer for 3 years versus a 1-year starter in Rocco Becht, or the quarterback that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But here's the complicated part. I've also admitted that Penn State's best scenario might actually be to go with the 1-year starter and also recruit the QB of the future. Again, this kind of resolves itself if Ethan Grunkemeyer says, I'm going to swallow my pride here. I'm going to temper my ego, and I want to be at Penn State, even if it's going to cost me a year of starting. I have 2 more years of eligibility. So yes, that kind of helps itself out, but I don't see that being the case. For Grunkemeyer to really take a step backwards like that when he can go be the starter at Virginia Tech tomorrow. With that being said, if you go with Rocco Becht or if you go with Beau Pribula, I'll talk more about Beau in just a second, but if you go with one of those 2 players, you are also going to have to get somebody that's going to come in and want to compete the next year. It's easier for Penn State to do that rather than try to recruit a journeyman quarterback and say, you're going to be QB2. As much as I like the upside of Casey Evans and Peyton Falzone, who committed in this class of 2026, it is not in Penn State's best interest to try to roll them out this upcoming season, even an emergency setup. Those guys will have to develop long-term. They have promise. They have potential, not in 2026. So you not only need to go get QB1, but also QB2. And that QB2 with the promise that he will be the guy in 27 and maybe even further than that. In theory, you can do that with Grunkemeyer. I don't see it happening since he started these past few games and looked pretty darn good as a starter. He looked pretty capable. So Grunkemeyer has a case. Rocco Becht has a case. Beau Pribula has a case. Be a feel-good story. Be a homecoming. He's from Pennsylvania. He loves Penn State. That's why he committed with that idea that he would be a developmental QB and potentially could go into the portal. And that's ultimately what happened. He ended up at Missouri. But now he's back in the portal. And there's a rumor floating around that Penn State's already made a competitive NIL offer to Beau Pribula. I haven't been able to confirm that, but that is what the Missouri insiders said is the reason that Beau Pribula is back in the portal to begin with. So Penn State is a school to watch for Pribula as well, especially if they don't get Rocco Becht. They're certainly not getting both. Pribula, same setup. You can have him as a 1-year starter, veteran guy that's proved that he can be a starter in the Big Ten or the SEC. You would have to tailor your offense. Taylor Mauser would have to tailor his offense around Pribula. But I'd be good with Pribula as that 1-year starter in 2026 by going, and you have to go and get the QB of the future, the backup, the QB2 also as well. Oregon did this. They got Dylan Gabriel, and then they got Dante Moore. And they haven't had any issues at quarterback, right, over the past couple of seasons now, have they? That's what Penn State can do. And that's probably the best scenario for them by going and getting someone like Rocco Becht or Bo Pribula. As much as I like Ethan Grunkemeyer, you got to think about the whole comprehensive quarterback room as opposed to just one player. Ethan Grunkemeyer goes down with an injury. You need somebody ready to go to back him up. That's not a true freshman that still needs to develop long term. Now, Penn State still needs a defensive coordinator. D'Anton Lynn emerged as that primary target. USC, Lincoln Riley don't seem all too confident about keeping him around. So what's the holdup? Well, there is a significant, probably millions of reasons why D'Anton Lynn isn't Penn State's defensive coordinator at this point, but still could be. We're going to discuss that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. You have live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can also bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. You can bet on NFL football. You can bet on college football as well. Lines are available for Penn State versus Clemson in this upcoming bowl game. Penn State is a 3.5-point underdog, plus 128 on the money line, minus 154. If you're thinking Clemson, the total is set at 48.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets. That's FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network out there. If you haven't already, go check out our all-new Everydayer Club. If you're not familiar with it yet, what is the Everydayer Club? Well, the Everydayer Club gives you inside access to Locked On Nittany Lions. You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Nittany Lions, and it's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcasting app. You also will get an invitation to a members-only Locked On Everydayer Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of the show. Go to LockedOnNittanyLions.supercast.com, or you can tap the link in the show notes to learn more and sign up for the Everydayer Club. So is D'Anton Lynn going to be the next defensive coordinator of Penn State? Are they going all in with D'Anton Lynn? Kind of the similar setup with what I just talked about at quarterback. Kind of the same case here with defensive coordinator in D'Anton Lynn. I would prefer to have D'Anton Lynn as Penn State's next defensive coordinator. However, the contingency plan isn't all too bad if this ends up being the case. So, but the focus is on D'Anton Lynn. And the holdup, what's the holdup? The holdup is millions of dollars. It's a buyout that I don't blame Penn State for not wanting to pay. But it seems like they're being patient and USC is not going to budge. USC wants D'Anton Lynn to be their defensive coordinator. I would think so. He's improved their defense year over year. What's been impressive to me is that Lynn is comparable to Jim Knowles in the fact that his defensive system, is not overly complicated, but it does take time and you have to chip away at it over time. Here's the difference though. D'Anton Lynn comes in and he gets instant results, instant progress. There isn't necessarily this 3-4 year buildup or anything like that. D'Anton Lynn made UCLA's defense top 10 in the country once upon a time. That's why he got the USC promotion, because USC said, well, if that guy can succeed in Southern California, we want him over here helping us. Then he took over a terrible, and I mean terrible, USC defense, bottom 10 in the country, and where now it's in the top half of the country. It's respectable. But there are some concerns, right? You're not going to get everybody that's going to be enamored with D'Anton Lynn as USC's defensive coordinator. Some people argue that his defensive system isn't that great. It is too complicated. It's taking too much time. The results don't back up the discourse around D'Anton Lynn. And I'm looking at that and I say, okay, you have a defensive coordinator that took over the 120th defense. USC's defense was bad. They were terrible. And now Lynn has them not only in the top 50, but continuing to push towards the top 25. This was going to be a multi-year project. So that's the difference between D'Anton Lynn and Jim Knowles, is that Jim Knowles was inheriting, okay, top 40, top 30 defenses, and he was able to take Ohio State's defense that was filled with tons of talent and was able to recruit that talent and then make them a top 3 group. Okay, well, D'Anton Lynn has had a total reinvention project here with USC's defense. So if you're complaining, if you're a USC and fans or pundits or anybody else, you're complaining that Lynn's not fixing the defense fast enough, you need to be a little patient and need to be a little grateful from where USC was once upon a time, because it could be a lot worse. So Lynn's your guy if you're Penn State. There's a reason that they continue to target him year after year. He's one of the rising minds in college football. Can we even say rising anymore? I think he's one of the top young, innovative minds in college football. Clearly, he's intrigued by the idea of Penn State. So intrigued that, well, the way that Lincoln Riley has phrased it, there's really not much that USC can do. There's really not much that his quote, and I'm kind of loosely quoting it here, but saying that there's basically nothing we can do, inferring that the ball is in Lynn's court, that it's up to him. If you want to be here, be here. If you don't, the door's right over there. And that's not to be disrespectful or anything like that, but acknowledging the situation that you either want to be here or you don't. If you want to be at your alma mater, go for it. Or are you trying to get a raise out of USC year after year after year? Because that's not going to fly. That's not going to fly anywhere, whether you're a head coach or a coordinator. But it seems to be the holdup is the buyout. And USC doesn't have to report it because they're a private university. So it's this mysterious buyout figure that no one knows the actual total of, but apparently it is pretty inconvenient for Penn State. Let's just put it that way. I think Penn State's going to be able to afford it because I go off of this logic. If Penn State was willing to part ways with James Franklin when the proposed buyout was north of $50 million, they're going to pay Andy Kotelnicki's buyout. They're going to pay Jim Knowles' buyout. I can understand not wanting to pay D'Anton Lynn's buyout at USC, especially if it's a little more pricey than what you would imagine it to be. But to sit around and say, well, Penn State just can't afford it, I just don't think Penn State is too privy of the idea of paying another contract when they might not have to. If you can negotiate the buyout, if you can work around it, Penn State is smart to spend money that they might not necessarily have to. You don't want to. If you want to avoid paying the money, I don't blame them for trying to go that route. I think what'll end up happening is that they're either going to pay the buyout and make this happen, or we're going to find out that Penn State really doesn't want to pay the buyout as it is. If they don't end up going with D'Anton Lynn, USC maybe gives him another raise or a bonus of sorts or some other contractual guarantees, because I do find it interesting that the reason Lynn didn't entertain it last year was because of family connections. They want to stay in Los Angeles, which I don't blame them. Los Angeles versus State College. I totally get that. I really do. But it also is your alma mater. It's the allure of it, returning back to Penn State and trying to work towards a national championship. I also think it's interesting. You're going to say no to James Franklin, but you might say yes to Matt Campbell. That's interesting too. What if James Franklin was the deal breaker a season ago and it wasn't necessarily proximity, where we're going to be living, all that type of stuff. Anyway, if Penn State doesn't get D'Anton Lynn, you're probably a different defensive coordinator candidate is going to emerge, or Penn State's going to go with the 1-year plan of John Haycock. And John Haycock being the former Iowa State defensive coordinator. Now, the idea is that he is going to be on staff in some capacity. The expectation is a senior analyst role. But as a 1-year stopgap, if you don't find your preferred coordinator, John Haycock can be the defensive coordinator for 1 year, and then you pass the baton to somebody that's outside of the program, or go with Dan Connor or Deion Barnes if you think they're ready and they just need another year to kind of sit and learn and be that co-defensive coordinator. You also entertain Anthony Poindexter. He's going to be calling plays in the Pinstripe Bowl here. I'm not opposed to John Haycock as a 1-year stopgap. Anthony Poindexter, D'Anton Lynn, those are all great options. So similar to quarterback here for Penn State, at least you have options. It's not all or nothing with D'Anton Lynn. But speaking of those assistant coaches, why haven't they been announced? The expectation is that Deion Barnes will be retained. Dan Connor will be retained at defensive line and linebacker, respectively. What about running backs coach? Nobody seems to be really talking about that. I got 2 candidates that Penn State should want on their staff. We're going to discuss them next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the college football season. Tailgates, packed stadiums, being right in the middle of all the action. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating. Long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout. That's why Gametime gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can open up the Gametime app, look at upcoming college football games, choose your favorite team, choose a game you want to go attend, and you'll be surprised how fast it was to find great seats. The app is incredibly easy to use, user-friendly interface. You can go from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. You will love being able to see, this is one of the best features, being able to see the view from your seat before you go to buy. So you know exactly what you're getting for your point of view. You got zone deals. You pick a section, Gametime will pick the seats, but you save even more money. You can take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That is code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Okay, so if the expectation is that Deion Barnes and Dan Connor are going to remain on staff, then why not just announce them? I mean, it makes sense to me. The reason that Penn State allegedly hasn't is because they're waiting on the defensive coordinator hire. And I just see, the quarterback, I can't say running backs coach because we got to discuss that, but quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, and then on the back end of the defense you have Deion Broomfield in the secondary. So just seeing the offers go out for high school, I think about the conversations that you would want to have with the transfer portal coming up. You want to start to figure out some of those answers, okay? So I guess when it comes to high school recruiting and re-offering players or offering some new players, it's strange not to see anything go out from defensive line and linebacker. But if you know the answer that it's going to be Deion Barnes and Dan Connor, I don't see the point of waiting until the defensive coordinator is hired. But if you do bring in a different defensive coordinator, I understand waiting to an extent because everybody needs to be on the same page. If you're going to go with D'Anton Lynn, you can't just recruit whatever player and expect them to fit into the defense. So you got to talk to D'Anton Lynn. You got to talk to, maybe it's Anthony Poindexter. You got to talk to John Haycock. What players do you want me to recruit? Who's going to best fit in this defense? We're all going to collaborate together, but you can't just go and blindly offer players in the portal and in high school recruiting because they might not work out in that specific defense, even if you like them as a prospect. So that's one thing. You just need everybody to be on the same page. But that's been the reason that's been explained to me, is that until Penn State hires the defensive coordinator and makes that official, that's why they're waiting on Deion Barnes and Dan Connor and Trace McSorley too. Why not Trace McSorley? Why hasn't it been made official? So you see my point. You see the dilemma here is that that's the way that it's been explained to me. It makes sense somewhat, but you also got Deion Broomfield. So why did you not wait to bring him in? I know he was a part of Iowa State's staff. It's just interesting to me that Barnes, Connor, and McSorley haven't really been announced to this point, but they're expected to stay on staff. It seems to be that way because James Franklin is targeting a former Penn State defensive line coach. Some of you might remember Sean Spencer, for example. Sean Spencer was there earlier in James Franklin's tenure. Really good defensive line coach, but he's being targeted by Virginia Tech. If Deion Barnes was set to leave or wasn't expected to return, you can see why James Franklin has pivoted there, because he wanted Deion Barnes. He wanted Dan Connor, but there haven't been any reports that he's pursuing either of those guys. So that's kind of where those things stand right now. Is the expectation is that Connor and Barnes and McSorley are all going to return, but what's the holdup with the announcement, right? At running backs coach, that seems to be no discussions or limited discussions. I imagine I can't watch and listen. I can't watch every podcast. I can't read every single article, but it seems like there has been little to no discourse around the running backs coach. Some people have talked about it, but not everybody, or at least not enough, because that's the biggest mystery to me, because we know the expectation is Dan Connor and Deion Barnes will be back. Trace McSorley too. You filled out the rest of the coaching roster and got those assistant coaches in place. We have some chatter around defensive coordinator, but nothing about running backs coach. No proposed candidates, no rumors, right? No discussions on social media. I got two candidates, so I'm going to start the discussion. I'm going to be the one that brings it up because I think it's weird. I think it's interesting that Penn State, there's just nothing around running back right now. I'll give you two candidates that I really like. One of them is already on campus as the assistant running backs coach in Charles Walker. The other one is somebody that could have been retained by James Franklin of Virginia Tech, but they let him go. Elijah Brooks. My preference is to actually go with Charles Walker if I had to pick between the two. But I actually think both of these guys are really solid candidates for Penn State. With Charles Walker, Walker has been around for a good bit, and he was the right-hand man of J1 Sider. There are going to be some people out there that say, okay, well, J1 Sider really wasn't that good. Well, I agree to disagree. I think J1 Sider, we saw what his absence on staff, how it affected Penn State in the ground game this season. No run game coordinator, things like that. But just kind of doing some research, because I actually didn't know much about Charles Walker going into the season or the past couple of seasons. And then as I started to talk about him with people that actually know him pretty well, it's like Penn State the no-brainer here might be to promote within. Go with Charles Walker. This guy was the assistant to J1 Sider. So J1 Sider, whether you like him or not, was a really good coach. Walker would also potentially keep this running back room together. Hey, there's a lot of good running backs that could potentially stay. Cam Wallace can be a starter next season. Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Jabri Wallace-Coleman. There are a lot of good running backs in that room. I don't think all of them would end up staying. And Tyke Hayes, I want to include him as well. He was kind of pushing for potential playing time as a true freshman, ended up redshirting. But if you could keep 3 or 4 of those 5 and then just kind of pick up when recruiting with where he had left off, I mean, Walker is also part of the development of Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. I like the idea of continuing that with Penn State. The running backs seem to really like him. He would keep the foundation of the running back room in place. He carries a lot of traits that J1 Sider did as a coach, as a developer, as a leader of young men. I like the idea of that with Charles Walker. If you're not going to go with Charles Walker, I think you need to go with Elijah Brooks. Penn State this isn't the end all be all, but you certainly want to reinforce it. This has a little bit more so to do with recruiting. Brooks has proven that he can develop with his other stops at Maryland and Virginia Tech, but this would be primarily a hire to help in recruiting. Penn State is losing out in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. They're focusing more in the Midwest, and that's totally understandable with what Matt Campbell, all of his connections and where they're from. But I do think you have to start to reinforce the DMV area again. You can do that with a literal direct connection with Elijah Brooks, who was the head coach at DeMatha High School. That is one of the best high schools in the state of Maryland. You would have that connection. He's somebody that has proven that he can develop running backs at smaller schools. And I say smaller schools, but Maryland and Virginia, he had pretty solid success, pretty respectable success at these past two stops. I like that he has connections in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area so that that's just not a forgotten territory. You have something there in recruiting to offset, because you don't want to just give up on DC, Maryland, Virginia, even though I am completely fine with Penn State focusing on the Midwest. I think there's plenty of talent out there that Matt Campbell can bring in. You also don't want to forget about the DMV. So Elijah Brooks coming in would stabilize that in recruiting. You would get someone that's a proven developer at the running back spot, and it wouldn't be too far off of what Penn State has done at the running back spot for these past few seasons. So Elijah Brooks would be that secondary candidate. After that, Penn State, if they're not going to go with either of them, we're going to have to do some more research and figure out, okay, what are there other options out there? But those would be my two preferred choices for the running back coach spot. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out the show. We do this daily here. If you are new, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all of your favorite Penn State sports teams, football, wrestling, basketball, hockey. We'll even talk recruiting here. It is all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.